Chapman. We are recording this.
I see why I should have used a handle now. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nick Chapman. I'm going to be talking about embedded malicious JavaScript. This is something I really got interested in looking at some of the Asprox attacks of last year, which is, if any of you saw the headlines, hundreds of thousands of websites compromised, all kinds of FUD, doubt, all kinds of nastiness. First of all, what is this we're talking about? It's generally JavaScript. It's embedded. Am I shouting to the mic too much? Okay. Generally embedded surreptitiously into legitimate normal web pages. Malicious, generally used to identify some more sophisticated versions will also use to target specific exploits based upon browser or operating system or a couple other things, country of origin. And JavaScript, obviously, because pretty much everyone in the world has JavaScript turned on to their web browser. Even if you're using NoScript or something like that, it's still really easy to get caught by this because I know I use NoScript a lot, and you go to a website and there'll be 8 or 10 different domains that all have different kinds of code running, and it's really a pain to figure out which ones you have to enable to actually make the web page work. So if you're just an average user, you just say, yeah, let all that stuff go by. And you'll let on, legitimatesite.com and also evilbadhackersite.com. This is something generally called a drive-by malware, which is basically you just go to the website and it's got this little iframe or script source link that then takes you to an evil site that downloads the evil JavaScript. And the bad guys will do this for a couple of reasons. It's a lot easier. What they would do previously is generally use search engine optimization techniques. Set up 100, 1,000 domains, link them back to each other. They tend to go after .edu sites, insert a bunch of links in there because they tend to be less well protected, have a good reputation. It's the next slide, actually. And this is just easier. They also get the eyes automatically. If they go insert a link into Walmart, they don't have to bother driving eyes to that or driving up their search engine rankings. It's just there. And just like you mentioned, the first real instance we saw this was the Super Bowl Sunday in 2007. Someone inserted malicious links into dolphinstadium.com. To the best of my knowledge, it was probably done by using an automated scanning tool, but manual SQL injection. They hit Dolphin Stadium, about 50 other websites. Two main exploits, MS-06014, which is the MDAC exploit, and MS-07004, which is VML buffer overflow rather. They basically, then you got a WoW password stealing Trojan. This is believed to be done by a Chinese gold farming syndicate. And there was actually just an article in The Guardian on Thursday about gold farming, so I've got some statistics on that. There was, let's see. They estimate, there was a study at Manchester where they estimate that 400,000 people in Asia are employed in the gold farming industry, that it makes $986 million a year, and the Chinese government's apparently just slapped a 20% tax on gold farming, which I thought was really entertaining. This was YL18.net, and you have to bear with me, these names aren't very pronounceable, so I'm just going to kind of make them up as I go along. This was the first one we know for sure was an automated SQL injection attack using this long cast hex string, if any of you guys have seen that before. We can go over that in a minute too. It would initially just throw the 0.js script link into these various websites and then redirect to a 0.html page. It had just a whole bunch of iframes sprouting out with a ton of different exploits. Some ActiveX stuff, some Yahoo Toolbar. It wasn't terribly sophisticated because basically just you'd have 5 or 10 exploits firing off at the same time, and if one of those was to crash your browser, then none of the other ones are going to work. Later on, actually, on the 7th of November, they replaced the 0.html with edimage.htm, which was a ActiveX control that was flawed and allowed arbitrary code to be executed, and they did that only 5 days after the exploit was publicly disclosed. So these guys are pretty quick about picking up on the newest, latest, best thing. Here's the actual SQLI This is obviously a lot longer in practice. That cast string will be 1,000 or so characters. So it's really easy to filter for and block if you know what you're looking for. If you've got an IPS or a WAF or something you can put in there. There have actually been a couple of different variants on this. The first couple of Chinese attacks would use a couple of strings, see if you were vulnerable, then launch this one. Later on, Asprox and things like that would just go ahead and blindly inject this, and if it works, it works. If not, oh well, you just get a bit more noise in your logs. This one in particular, I'll show you this is the decoded version, and this got upgraded a bit later, but this one just basically goes through and looks for any varchars in your database, grabs like all the tables, and just sticks this little JavaScript portion in there. So any text you had that was later displayed on your web page, you know, titles, content, whatever, just gets a whole bunch of JavaScript stuck in it. Okay, going a little bit later, the next round was in December of 2007. This one didn't have too many websites exploited, but it's using the same exploit, the MDAC one, and also the real player buffer overflow. And this was, again, I believe just a few weeks after this particular real player exploit was disclosed. They were again using it and launching a whole new round of attacks so that they could take advantage of it before people start patching. Okay, and the next round is involving some of the same IPs for sending back data for the Trojan that was downloaded. This one did a bit better, about 40,000 websites, and this was the first one to use an actual cursor-based SQL injection attack, which I'll show you in a minute. That's beneficial because it also goes after ntext, text, nvarchar fields, all kinds of different stuff. And this is just a kind of generic password stealing Trojan. It just basically sits there and watches for IE to post forms. Doesn't affect Firebox, just IE. And anytime it sees a post request with an input type of password, it encrypts it and sends it off to China for them to do what they will with it. This is the newer, improved version. This actually uses a cursor, which I wasn't aware of what this was until I started looking at it. It's basically kind of just like a loop for SQL, where you go through and instantiate this cursor that does something to each and every table. And in this case, again, it's just going through and checking the type, looking for various varchars and such, and inserting this lovely string, which they decided to get a bit fun, just call it fuckpp.js, which some of these guys actually have a sense of humor, as we'll see a bit later on. In April, SANS was able to actually find one of the tools being used to do this SQL injection. We know there are a number of different tools running around. This one in particular uses a Google scanning engine, which I believe most of them do. And it will look for ASP pages. That's what initially all of these did, was go after specifically only ASP pages. Later it evolved to also ASP.NET instead of classic ASP, and also Cold Fusion, and all just Microsoft stuff, which Microsoft is very firm. It's not us. There's no security problem. There's nothing we can patch. It's just poor web app coding that allows a SQL injection, which is true, but they still got a lot of heat from that, and eventually they had to make a response to it, even though it's not really their problem. Although it is kind of one thing that Microsoft SQL Server allows is multiple compound statements. So that does make it a lot easier to do SQL injection, because you can just comment out something and then continue on with the statement. The next big round was winzipices, I guess. This was in May, and this got over 100,000 sites. This is when they started going to using multiple domains instead of just one. So you've got the winzipices that had about 75,000 sites, and also this bbs.outerz0ne, I guess, about 44,000. And this was the first time we saw them actually integrating a known exploit kit. I don't know the name of it because it's a Chinese one, but it used a whole bunch of different exploits that were actually targeted somewhat based upon the browser. It would look at if you have IE 6 or 7, depending upon that, would give you different real player exploits. They actually had 2 different versions of that, and a few other exploits as well. And this one was again a password stealing Trojan for WoW, and it actually had a further WoW connection. And I'm sure most of you have heard of the problems of WoW, people having their characters stolen and all that stuff. Apparently a lot of that happens actually via posts to various WoW forums that are linked to keyloggers and Trojans and stuff. And when the Shadow server guys were looking at this, they found that there was a, whenever you got a 404 error on this website, it would include a test.htm file in an iframe. They would just load one of these random WoW screenshots with kind of interesting alternate tags. And it's all about this stuff, I am the red, which I don't play WoW, so I didn't really have any idea what this was at all. I actually had to go do some research on it and found out, actually the Shadow server guys continued to look at it, and they found this post, the Ret Paladin, which apparently is some WoW character that's really good at player killing. So everyone loves to hate on them, and some guy made this rather humorous post, I'm not sure if you guys can read that, about I am the Ret, I am, you know, elite, and I kill people, and all kinds of good stuff. And this got a pretty good following and lots of lols in the WoW community. So what these guys started to do is just take this same thing, and there's a little flash file here at the end. They take that flash link and just redirect it to that test.htm. And so you'd get a random screenshot, and at the same time, you're downloading a keylogger and a password stealer for WoW. They also did that with another post, something about some giant alliance raid. But again, I don't really play WoW, so I don't know. One good thing I can say to defend against that, play NetHack. It's a much better game, and no one will give you a Trojan trying to steal your password. Later on in May, May was actually a pretty big month for these SQL injections. May and June were both significant upticks. In May, the Russians decided to start getting involved. The guys behind the Zlob Trojan, or also the DNS changer Trojan, they decided to go after PHP bulletin board, and instead of doing SQL injection, they actually went for a remote file inclusion. And as you can tell by the number of websites, they did pretty well. They got over 800,000 websites, and again, just inserted this little script source equals going to a JavaScript. And you'll notice that a lot of these, and I'm not sure if it's because it's the same tool or just because they stole the code, usually uses JavaScript files that are 1.js, b.js, f.js. A bit later, they actually got a bit more involved and start using like script.js, style.js, things that are a bit harder to filter. Because I mean, it's pretty obvious if you see a link to something, it's like, you know, blah 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 random characters .ru/1.js. It's something fishy is going on, and you probably don't really want to go there. Let's see. This one was actually, Zlob's done a couple of different kinds of attacks. Sometimes they'll do the Windows pop-up attack where, you know, your computer is a virus, like all the AV 2009 stuff. Download this to fix it. This one was actually a video codex one where, you know, you go to this site and they say, oh, hot naked ladies, or, you know, George Bush falling and hitting his head. Just download and install this codex and you can see it. Which of course you get nothing at then except a Trojan. Okay. And this is the one that I really got into is Asprox, which how many guys of you have heard of Asprox before? Many? Okay. This is kind of the big 800-pound gorilla of the mass SQL injections. It's a botnet. It was originally based upon a Trojan called Damek. It was just a generic password stealing Trojan. It'd, you know, go try and steal your credentials for this or that. And as the bad guys behind this stuff tend to do, they then expanded that into a full crimeware family, such that it would push updates, talk back to control and command servers, all kinds of fun stuff. Right now, it's mostly used for phishing emails and just generic spam. It was one of the big spam botnets of 2008. They're believed pretty strongly to be working with the Rockfish gang, which is one of the guys behind most of the phishing emails. They're in Romania. Thank you. Romania is also, it's amazing, I think, some of the countries that this stuff comes from, because everyone knows, you know, China and Russia are really big on this stuff, but Romania is also big. Turkey. I thought something was kind of amusing. A few months ago, there was actually a guy who snitched on some hackers in Turkey, and he got kidnapped off the street, and then they released photos of him holding a little sign saying, "I am rat, I am bitch, I snitched on whatever this guy's handle was." And I mean, those guys play for real. I mean, everyone kind of knows that like the RBN is mafia involved, but you know, at least here in America, we don't have to worry about, you know, being snatched off the street by bad guys, by the FBI maybe.
Explain what the RBN is. Explain what the RBN is, not.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. The RBN is the Russian Business Network. It's kind of metastasized, but for a long time, it was doing a lot of the badness out of Russia, and they actually moved servers off to Turkey and some of the other areas. But they were doing a lot of trying to think what specific. Do you know what specific stuff they were doing?
They were like the malware, the bad ISP of.
Yeah, they were providing hosting services for kind of like bulletproof hosting, which if you guys are familiar with, that's where, you know, spammers go to pay 10 grand a month to be able to send spam and do all kinds of nasty stuff. The RBN would basically lease out their facilities, their server space and stuff.
The Russian mafia.
Yeah, well, a lot of people think the Russian mafia controls them. There's allegations of KGB influence. There was actually an American security researcher who was from Russia who actually made the mistake of commenting that the KGB was linked up the RBN on record. So I don't think he can go home again. And in May 12th of 2008, I know this exactly because one of my colleagues, Joe Stewart, actually monitors this botnet and a lot of others. They pushed out a new binary, MS Center or MS Security Center extension, which then installed itself as that service. And this was the SQL attack component to Asprox. It's got two basic things. It'll go like everything else, go look for Google, look for an ASP, and then in the URL, it's just looks for different kinds of variables that might be possibly vulnerable to SQL injection. Another thing that Asprox does really well is upgrading to the latest and greatest. You saw they stole this SQL injection stuff from the Chinese, which, and again, this happened in May. SANS published that the tool was available in April. So could be a coincidence, but both the Zlob guys and Asprox both went after stuff in May and April. And again in May, Mark Dodd, if you remember this Inhuman Flash exploit, where he was doing all kinds of crazy stuff. I believe he had actual shell code that was at various times being interpreted as both ActionScript bytecode for Flash and also for the actual shell code for the exploit. And I can't really follow that. I'm not that elite. But these guys, apparently a month later, or you know, he released in late May, and it was in June, so a little bit later, add this to Asprox. And when this exploit was first being seen, I think it was actually the Chinese that were doing it first. It was believed to be an O-Day because no one had seen something like this before. And then later people realized, oh no, wait, that's like crazy stuff that Mark Dowd was doing. So they looked at it that way. See, and just to go over, this is some of the code being used by this. They'll initially inject the link to b.js. And this is pretty simple. It creates a cookie, sets an expiration time, and just kind of sends you on an iframe through to the next page, which this is then the add.html, and it's just basic version checking. It looks, Flash 1.15 was the latest version that was affected by this flaw, and I'm guessing there was something slightly different about the 47 version. because they give you two different flash files, either advert.swf or banner.swf, and just depending on which flash you have. And I'm actually going to go over the details of the exploit itself, because like I said, I'm just not that elite. But if you look at it in hex, you can see it. There's actually a link to an executable, which is a slightly different one for the banner and the advert flash files. But they both just basically end up being Asprox Trojans that then, you know, take over your box and you start sending out spam and phish and what have you. Another really great kit. Any of you familiar with that one? This one does some really nasty obfuscated JavaScript. Like, I mean, these guys have done several different things to obfuscate stuff. Usually it's pretty simple stuff, like, you know, you're instantiating ActiveX control, you've got that nice long GUID. They'll just break that up so that if you've got, you know, just a simple IDS, you can't just look for the whole string. And they'll do things like that, or breaking up, you know, eval or location.href or different things that just, you know, kind of pop out and scream, this is bad, into different variables and recombining them. These guys go a lot further. One of the things they do is they randomize all the function names, as you'll see in a minute. So they're just all random characters. You can't keep them the same from one to one. There's no real use to just write filters for just the name. It's not terribly prevalent in the wild. It's pretty expensive as far as malware kits go. It's $1,500 to $3,000, which if you're not familiar with the exploit kit game, I think it's kind of funny that these bad guys are actually charging money for their wares. I mean, and they've got various different ways to try to, you know, make sure people actually do it correctly. Like the tool that Sans found that was doing SQL injection actually went back and talked to a pay.asp script located in China, and includes some sort of a serial number, presumably for the, you know, malware as a service, so that this guy can get paid for every time they do a SQL injection, you know, 50 cents a pop or $1 a pop or what have you. What's that? Yeah, Impact's another one. That one's actually a lot cheaper. It's only about $300 usually. This one was launched, version 1.0 or so was launched at the beginning of 2007, and 2.0 was in beta at the end of 2007. And here's what it will actually look like. You basically got a couple of things here I didn't read. There's the location.href, the eval. Everyone knows eval is evil, right? There's no reason at all anyone would ever use eval for good code. And the arguments.callee, which is, I think, one of the more interesting things about how this works. And it starts off this function here, which is obviously randomized. And then at the end of the script, you've got just this huge encoded stuff that has to be decrypted. And this guy is actually using real encryption, because normally what you do when you've got obfuscated JavaScript, you want to find out what it is. You just find the eval, change it to an alert or document.write, and take a look at it. Try to do it on this one, and you just get gibberish. And what they're doing is this arguments.callee here is actually the entire function, and they use the text of the entire function as the key to decrypt it. So that if you change anything by changing that eval to a document.write, you've just messed up the key, and now it doesn't work. So the solution to that is basically just to copy the entire function into another variable and then change it. Here's a bit of a look at the code. I've kind of de-obfuscated this and put in decent actual names for things. As you can tell, it's basically, it takes this huge long string that was at the bottom to decode it, and then it goes through, does a bunch of things, assigns some functional keywords to variables. It also goes through and like replaces some various things, changes it around. It will call to uppercase, then go through and do a whole bunch of loops, and then go to the actual decryption code, which is over here, which I'm not terribly good at math, so I can't tell you exactly how it works. But this is, if you've ever seen code for encryption, it's got, you know, all the nice raised to a certain thing and a big loop and all that good math stuff. And as I mentioned, Microsoft was getting all kinds of heat about this, even though it's not actually a flaw in any Microsoft product. Still, because so many Microsoft sites were being attacked, and it was only Microsoft sites that were targeted, they eventually had to do something. So on June 24th, they released an advisory. They released an updated version of something called URL-scan, which is basically a very basic WAF, or Web Application Firewall. The last version they'd actually released was 2.5, which was 5 years ago. So obviously someone at Microsoft decided, no, we can't take this anymore. We've got to do something about this. So they released this new version. It's got a couple new features. Mainly they can scan for keywords in query strings, and it can also decode them. So that big long hex string, you can just look for stuff in that and just look for, the badness in that. You can also just disable URLs that are over a certain size. So a real simple way to avoid any of this is just to, not allow or just block any requests to your web server that are over a K. For almost any, normal web application, that's perfectly fine. And of course, you'd have to tailor this to your own web app. But unless you're doing something really weird, like ad sites, which cause all kinds of problems for IPS filters, you'll be fine just blocking anything over a K. They also worked with HP, formerly, yeah.
Why did you say it only attacks Microsoft browsers?
Microsoft websites. It goes after, yeah, it specifically originally just targeted ASP websites, ASP Classic, and then also went to ASP.NET and later Cold Fusion.
Where does URL-scan run?
URL-scan's a web application firewall, so it lives on the actual web server and basically inspects the traffic coming to the web server before it actually hits the IAS process.
So something a webmaster chooses to install?
Exactly.
Okay.
And it's nothing, like I said, it's nothing particular about Microsoft that causes it to be attacked. It's just that they figure, ASP, people writing it don't really know what they're doing, probably be an easy target.
So any user, any browser, and no URL scan they can install?
Sorry?
It could be any user in any browser, and there's no scanner for them.
No, if you want to, there are basically two different kinds of attacks here. There's the injecting the code into the web page, which is SQL injection. To protect against that, you have to either write code properly, so not vulnerable to SQL injection, parameterized queries, input sanitization, all that kind of good stuff, or include a web application firewall or like URL scan or several other ones. Mod Security is the Apache product that will basically look for SQL injection and block it. But then if you're a user browsing these websites that have been infected, if you're a user browsing these websites that have been infected, you're going to need something like NoScript that will block this JavaScript coming from afar. And like I said earlier, that works, but you've got to be careful because if you want to make a website work, sometimes you have to enable several different domains that oftentimes don't seem related all to the original domain. So if you just allow all of them, you're screwed. Also, if you do then go to these, depending on which exploit they're using, you may or may not be vulnerable to it. They generally don't use O-Day exploits. I mean, a lot of these are actually from like Microsoft patches from 06 or 07. And these are late 07 through 08 that these attacks are going on, showing that you don't need O-Day to actually get a lot of compromises. And like I said about this lob stuff, it's not, you can do this for other things besides SQL injection. They use remote file inclusion attacks against PHP bulletin board, which is generally just a lot of content management systems and bulletin boards will allow you to include files. And the idea is it's supposed to be a local file, like you point to another file on the server. But if there's a flaw in the code, you can just include it from randombadsite.com. And then you've got either your own code there. That's how they do a lot of defacements. People also include a lot of web shells, which are basically just a little PHP or whatever code that lets people execute commands on a local machine by using exec or system or something like that.
That's a nice feature for remote file inclusion.
Oh yeah, it's great. Oh, damn it. Sorry about that. And also, in addition to that, they also released a web vulnerability scanning tool. It was actually HP, which had bought WebSense, released a version of WebInspect called Scrawler. It's a just really stripped down version, just looks for SQL injection, doesn't look at post forms, can't actually log into websites, but just kind of here, try this, you know. I think they called it defense and inspection or something in their advisory, some flashy shock and awe name, you know. Look for your vulnerabilities here, block the attacks here kind of thing. Another piece of malicious JavaScript that I found, this was actually, Sans talked about some of their diary entries. This is fake Yahoo, or excuse me, it says fake Yahoo Toolbar, but it should say fake Yahoo Counter. I apologize. I was really sick this week when I was making these slides, so it was under heavy Robitussin. But this basically, once you deobfuscate all that, will basically just, again, send you to a malicious, exploit-ridden web page. This one actually is kind of interesting how it got there. There's a certain web hosting provider that seems to be having some security issues in that I've seen different estimates, but half or more of their websites have been affected by something like this or some other exploits. Not quite sure how they got in, but these guys are seeing a lot of other issues as well. Their files would suddenly be chmod to 777 for no apparent reason. They'll get this stuff everywhere, and it seems to be the database is actually compromised because people clean everything out, and then next thing, it's right back there. And actually, a lot of these will actually include rootkits. So they'll put this into your website, then include rootkit code on your server, so if you clean it out, they'll just come back and put it back on. This guy's kind of funny because if you run this through, I forget what the Sans guys did, but if you run through the basic try and deobfuscate, it just comes up a comment that says, just fuck off. So like I said, these guys have a sense of humor. Another thing associated with this, or again, maybe just because these guys are compromised 6 ways from Sunday, is they get this .htaccess file that if you're coming from Google or MSN or any big search engine, just redirects you to malware. Yeah, which is nice because it's subtle, because if you're just going to your website, or if it's a friend of yours just types it in, you're fine. But if you're just randomly surfing for it, through Google or whatever, nope, you get owned. And looking on to the future, I think this is just going to continue to happen. I mean, we've seen this from really get big from the end of 2007 all the way through 2008, and it's still happening. There's still tons and tons of websites that are vulnerable to SQL injection. And that's just one way to attack. As we saw with the PHP bulletin board, remote file inclusion, they got 800,000 websites. Another thing I think we'll continue to see is this specialization in the underground economy. You've got Asprox, which is great botnet, good for sending spam, good for hosting malicious websites. They team up with Rockfish, and these guys are just the top of the game as far as actual sending Fisher emails and making good Fisher sites that look legitimate. So these guys team up, and they got the ability to send spam, the ability to host websites, and the expertise to do it well. I think we'll keep seeing that. We'll keep seeing bad guys continue to innovate and then steal each other's innovations. Like this one, the Chinese started it, then the Russians got involved, and then they started taking exploit kits. And I mean, they might have paid for that Neosploit kit or the Chinese tool, but I doubt it. I think we'll continue to see content management systems affecting more, because these things are just completely wide open. Joomla and all this stuff, they're just new exploits found them every day almost. And a lot of people use them. They're just ripe for the picking. It's the low-hanging fruit. Yeah, and people don't patch them. What I think will be really interesting finds a novel attack, either a novel form of SQL injection that gets past a lot of the existing filters, or some other way to do it, and combines that with an O-Day client exploit. And then you'll have a whole bunch of people going through, tons, probably hundreds of thousands of websites infected, and then there's no defense on the client side except for something like NoScript. And speaking of this is something I've seen recently. I'm not really sure who's doing it. It's these SQL injection, just recon scans. Doesn't actually do anything malicious. Just tries to get a list of your tables. Coming from a user agent of NV32TS, coming from multiple IPs. They don't match any known botnets. So I don't know what they're doing, but they could very well be compiling a list of sites known to be vulnerable. They can just go attack all at once one day. And actually, if anyone does happen to know what that is, please let me know. Questions? Comments? Okay. Well, yes?
Give us a hint about that provider that's
Not on camera. I'll be around later. Here's some references. And if any other questions, I've got a few other just code samples here. This is a relatively recent one from Asprox. It's just from January of this year, just showing you some of the different other kinds of encryption. The other neat thing here is they're looking for very specific character sets. So like no Chinese, I think that's Korean, and I'm not sure what some of these other guys are, but in the malware market, different countries are more valuable than others. Just like, Carter's will sell credit cards, and the better complete is, and so on and so forth, have different values. An owned computer in America is worth a lot more than an owned computer in China. And for a while, the Chinese underground seemed to be a bit reluctant to attack other Chinese sites also. Although that is changing now. There have been some China on China DOS situations going on. What's that?
competition amongst the bad guys.
Oh, yeah. What's that? Indonesia? Okay. And this is just some other stuff. Same guy. This is the next file in. Just showing how they kind of do a little bit of obfuscation. This is another one from, I think, the beginning of this year. This is a Chinese one. I believe this is one of the just random Chinese tools not related to Asprox. I'm not sure if it's actually a botnet or just people individually just using this tool to go through it. This just shows you a little bit of the browser fingerprinting they'll do. If you've got IE6, do this. If you've got IE7, do that. If you've got Firefox, just write a line. So I guess they don't want to compromise Firefox. Or maybe they just don't have any exploits for it. Yeah?
How do you see the Web 2.0 kind of languages start melding in with this? This seems to be all JavaScript-centric, correct?
Yeah, it's mainly JavaScript-centric. Some actually did use VBScript. You're talking about, well, what Web 2.0 language are you talking about? Like Ajax or?
Yeah.
Well, Ajax is still JavaScript. So, really, the real thing about Web 2.0, I think the real challenge we have there is the whole idea of Web 2.0 is running arbitrary code from untrusted sources. How do you do that? You can, try and examine the code, then you just run into the halting problem where if you're going to run the code, you can't do that unless you actually run it in a sandbox. And then running in a sandbox, you get lots of problems with user interaction. Did it stop because I didn't click here or what have you? And I think that's really the next big issue in computer security is how to deal with arbitrary untrusted code. You could try a reputation system. Damn it. You could try a reputation system of some kind, but that gets kind of iffy too because, like you're seeing here, people would just attack the people who have a good reputation and then insert their code there. This is just a bit more of some other kind of encryption they do, or obfuscation. This isn't real encryption. And I think, yeah, that's all I got. Any other questions?
Are your slides downloadable?
Not yet, but I figured I'd put them. I don't know if Skydog's going to put them up anywhere or not, but I'll make them available. Or you can just drop me an email, and Chapman at SecureWorks. Yes?
If you guys want to put it up, I'd be glad to put them up. Just tell me what you want.
Cool. Yeah, I'll give you a copy then.
Do you know of some site where you can download these
Where you can download them?
like the JavaScript features?
If you just mean the actual JavaScript itself, that's really easy to find. Just go to Google and search for b.js or 0.js. Shadow Server has a list of, I probably should include a slide of that, has a list of the different domains. But even the domains that were from like 2007 and early 2008, you can still find websites that still have those, haven't been cleaned up yet. So you can do that and just kind of follow them through the different links. They do try and, some of them try and include some measures to make it more difficult for researchers to find. Like you have to have a valid user agent, so no, wget by itself won't work. You have to have the cookie from before. There are timeouts where you have to go from one to the other a certain amount of time, things like that. Yes?
I can't ever do anything about those. Like all those were real domains. Because I can't ever say.
Does ICANN ever do anything?
Revoke their domain.
ICANN monitors registrars. Registrars are pretty much on their own. I actually went and looked up the ICANN.
Because some of them were .NET.
Well, either way, they pretty much push down the registrar. What ICANN will monitor, they only do certain things. Like if you want to get ICANN pissed off at a registrar, tell ICANN they're not, the registrar isn't making people include correct who is. Because ICANN just flatly disclaims any responsibility for malicious content. But false who is no good. EST domains recently was kicked off as an official registrar, not because of all the malicious stuff they were hosting, but because their president was convicted of a crime. So ICANN's not, in my experience, very interested in overseeing that. It all comes down to the individual registrar. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you. I don't know how to hack. I just need to know how to, follow JavaScript around. Thank you very much.